The sun was just beginning to rise over the horizon, painting the sky with soft shades of orange and pink. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of dew-covered grass. At Fort Ironclad, a remote military base nestled in the rugged wilderness, everything was quiet except for the distant chirping of birds. That silence didn't last long. A low hum filled the air as a sleek, otherworldly ship descended from the sky, its metallic surface shimmering like liquid silver under the morning light. The ship landed gently on the designated clearing, kicking up a cloud of dust that swirled around the area. Moments later, a ramp extended downward, and out stepped Zorvac, the leader of the Krylon delegation. He was tall, his body covered in smooth, iridescent scales that shifted colors with every movement. His sharp eyes scanned the surroundings, taking in the simple buildings and open fields. Behind him followed Varnus, his second in command, whose expression mirrored Zorvac's skepticism. Both aliens wore armor that looked far more advanced than anything Earth had to offer. Colonel Alan Hayes stood at attention near the landing site, flanked by Lieutenant Emily Dawson. Hayes was a man in his late 50s, with graying hair and a face lined by years of service. His posture was rigid, his hands clasped behind his back. Dawson, younger and leaner, held a tablet in one hand, ready to assist. They watched silently as the aliens approached, their boots making no sound against the ground. "Welcome to Fort Ironclad," Hayes said, his voice steady and calm. "I trust your journey here was uneventful." Zorvac tilted his head slightly, studying the human before him. "It was adequate," he replied, his tone laced with condescension. "Though I admit I expected more from a species rumored to be so resilient." Hayes raised an eyebrow, but didn't take the bait. Instead, he gestured toward the training grounds. "If you'll follow me, we can begin your observation. Our recruits are assembling now." As they walked, Zorvac's gaze swept over the base. It wasn't particularly impressive. Simple barracks, a few vehicles parked nearby, and a large field marked with obstacles. But what caught his attention were the humans gathering in the distance. About 30 men and women stood in uneven rows, their uniforms rumpled and ill-fitting. Some yawned, others shuffled nervously, and a few stretched stiff muscles. To Zorvac, they looked ordinary, fragile even. Nothing about them suggested the legendary toughness his people had heard rumors of. Among the recruits was Jake Carter, a wiry young man with calloused hands from years of working as a mechanic. He adjusted his cap awkwardly, trying not to make eye contact with the imposing aliens. Beside him stood Maria Lopez, her dark hair tied back in a tight bun. She glanced at the visitors briefly before focusing on the sergeant barking orders. Further down the line was Daniel Quinn, a broad-shouldered man with tattoos peeking out from under his sleeves. His jaw was set, his expression unreadable. "This is it?" Zorvac asked, his lip curling slightly. "These are the mighty Deathworlders." Hayes stopped walking and turned to face him. "You're here to observe, not judge," he said firmly. "Let the evidence speak for itself." Zorvac exchanged a glance with Varnus, who shrugged almost imperceptibly. For now, they would watch. But neither alien believed these ordinary-looking humans could prove anything extraordinary. Little did they know, the day ahead would challenge everything they thought they knew. The whistle blew, signaling the start of the morning routine. The recruits snapped to attention, their movements clumsy but determined. As they began their warm-up exercises, Zorvac folded his arms across his chest, his expression skeptical. Yet, deep down, a tiny seed of curiosity took root. Maybe there was more to these humans than met the eye. Or maybe they were exactly as weak as they appeared. Only time would tell. And so, the stage was set. What unfolded next would leave even the proud Krylon warriors questioning their own assumptions about strength, resilience, and what it truly meant to be formidable. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the training grounds. Zorvac and Varnus stood at the edge of the field, their alien forms towering over the humans, but drawing little attention from the recruits who were already focused on their tasks. Colonel Alan Hayes and Lieutenant Emily Dawson stayed nearby, watching silently as the day's activities began. The first event was the obstacle course, a gauntlet designed to test strength, speed, and teamwork. It stretched across the field, a chaotic maze of wooden walls, muddy trenches, barbed wire, and rope nets. To the Krylon warriors, it looked primitive compared to the advanced combat simulations they used back home. Still, they watched with mild interest as the sergeant blew his whistle, signaling the start. Jake Carter was among the first group to move. He sprinted forward with surprising energy, though his wiry frame didn't seem built for such physical exertion. When he reached the 8-foot wall, however, doubt crept into his mind. He jumped, grabbed the top edge, and tried to pull himself up, but his arms trembled under the strain. Just as he thought about giving up, Maria Lopez appeared beside him. Without hesitation, she cupped her hands together and offered him a boost. "Come on," she shouted, her voice firm but encouraging. With her help, Jake scrambled over the wall and landed heavily on the other side. For a moment, their eyes met, and Jake nodded in silent gratitude before continuing. Maria followed close behind, her movements quick and efficient despite the weight of her gear. She had never been an athlete, but determination burned in her chest. This wasn't just about proving herself, it was about surviving. Further down the course, Daniel Quinn powered through the challenges with raw intensity. His muscles strained as he crawled under barbed wire, mud-caking his uniform and face. At one point, his boots slipped, and he nearly got stuck, but he gritted his teeth and pushed forward. Pain meant nothing to him. Failure meant everything. Each step reminded him why he had joined this program, to escape his past and become someone better. Zorvac watched the scene unfold with growing disbelief. These humans weren't particularly strong or fast by Krylon standards, yet they refused to give up. Even when they stumbled or fell, they got back up and kept going. He turned to Varnus, who seemed equally perplexed. "They are inefficient," Zorvac muttered. "Their bodies are weak, their techniques clumsy." "True," Varnus replied, narrowing his eyes. "But they do not stop." "Why?" Hayes overheard their conversation and stepped closer. "Because quitting isn't an option," he said simply. "Not here." Zorvac frowned, unsure how to interpret the statement. In Krylon culture, weakness was punished harshly, and failure often meant death. The idea of persisting despite obvious flaws felt foreign and oddly admirable. As the obstacle course continued, small moments of camaraderie emerged. When Sarah Bennett, a quiet recruit with glasses smudged from sweat, struggled to climb a rope ladder, two others rushed to steady it for her. Their teamwork allowed her to reach the top, where she paused briefly to catch her breath before descending. Even Kevin Walsh, who often doubted his own abilities, found courage when Jake shouted encouragement from the sidelines. By the time the last recruit crossed the finish line, everyone was covered in dirt and exhaustion. Some collapsed onto the ground, gasping for air, while others leaned on each other for support. Despite their ragged appearances, there was a sense of pride in the air, a shared understanding that they had endured something difficult together. Zorvac couldn't deny the display intrigued him. These humans lacked the natural advantages of his kind: superior strength, advanced technology, centuries of evolution. But they compensated with something else entirely. It wasn't just resilience or teamwork. It was something deeper, something harder to define. Varnus broke the silence. "Perhaps we have underestimated them." Zorvac didn't respond immediately. Instead, he scanned the faces of the recruits, noting the mix of fatigue and triumph. For the first time, he wondered if humanity's reputation as Deathworlders might be rooted in truth after all. Colonel Hayes approached the aliens once the recruits were dismissed for a short break. "Still think they're weak?" he asked, a hint of challenge in his tone. Zorvac hesitated, then shook his head slightly. "No," he admitted, "but I want to see more." And so, the observation continued, with both curiosity and respect beginning to grow in the hearts of the Krylon delegation. What started as skepticism was slowly turning into admiration, for these ordinary humans were proving themselves anything but ordinary. Night had fallen over Fort Ironclad, blanketing the base in darkness. The air was cooler now, carrying the faint hum of crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. For the recruits, the day wasn't over yet. Under the watchful eyes of Colonel Alan Hayes and Lieutenant Emily Dawson, they prepared for their next challenge: night maneuvers. This exercise would test not just their physical endurance, but also their ability to think clearly under pressure. Zorvac and Varnis stood near the edge of the training area, their glowing eyes cutting through the shadows. They watched as the recruits gathered around a map illuminated by a dim lantern. Sergeant Miller, a gruff man with a voice like gravel, explained the mission. The recruits were divided into squads and tasked with navigating a dense forest while avoiding enemy patrols, played by experienced soldiers using flashlights and simulated gunfire. "This is ridiculous," Zorvac muttered to Varnis. "They have no advanced sensors or weapons. How can they possibly succeed?" Varnis didn't answer. His attention was fixed on the humans, who were already moving out in small groups. Despite their lack of technology, there was an undeniable sense of purpose in their movements. Jake Carter's squad moved cautiously through the woods, their footsteps soft against the damp earth. Jake held a flashlight in one hand, its beam intentionally low to avoid detection. Beside him, Maria Lopes carried a makeshift compass made from a piece of string and a magnetized needle. Her hands were steady as she checked their direction, her focus unwavering. "Keep it quiet," Jake whispered to his team. "We don't want them hearing us." Maria nodded and pointed toward a cluster of trees ahead. "That way," she said softly. "We'll loop around and avoid the patrol." The squad followed her lead, staying close together. When they heard distant voices and saw beams of light sweeping through the trees, they froze. Jake signaled for everyone to crouch low. They waited, holding their breaths, until the patrol passed. Then they continued forward, step by careful step. In another part of the forest, Daniel Quinn's squad faced a different challenge. Their path was blocked by a shallow stream, its surface reflecting the moonlight. Crossing it meant risking noise, but staying put meant falling behind schedule. Daniel glanced at his teammates, then stepped into the water without hesitation. The cold bit at his legs, but he ignored it, motioning for the others to follow. Sarah Bennett hesitated at the edge of the stream, her boots sinking slightly into the mud. She wasn't used to this kind of thing. Back home, she spent most of her time reading books or studying, but something inside her pushed her forward. She stepped into the water, wincing at the chill, and focused on keeping up with the group. As the night wore on, the challenges grew harder. One squad accidentally triggered a tripwire, setting off a harmless but loud alarm that drew the attention of multiple patrols. Kevin Walsh panicked momentarily, but Jake barked a sharp order to regroup, and the squad managed to slip away before being caught. Zorvac and Varnis observed everything from a distance, their expressions unreadable. At first, they dismissed the humans' efforts as clumsy and inefficient, but as the hours passed, they began to notice something remarkable. These recruits weren't just following orders. They were thinking for themselves, adapting to unexpected problems, and working together to overcome obstacles. "They are resourceful," Varnis admitted reluctantly, breaking the silence between them. Zorvac didn't respond right away. He watched Maria improvise a splint for a recruit who twisted an ankle, using nothing but sticks and strips of cloth. He saw Jake take charge when his squad faced confusion, his voice calm but firm, and he noticed how even the quieter ones, like Sarah, found ways to contribute, proving their worth in moments of need. By sunrise, the surviving squads regrouped at the finish line, exhausted but triumphant. Mud streaked their uniforms, and some bore fresh cuts and bruises, but their faces glowed with pride. Colonel Hayes approached them, nodding in approval. "You did well," he said. "Remember, It's not about being perfect. It's about doing your best when it matters. Zorvac stepped forward, his curiosity outweighing his skepticism. How do you teach them to endure so much? He asked Hayes. To keep going, even when things seem impossible. Hayes looked at him, his expression thoughtful. It's simple, he replied. We show them what they're capable of. And then we let them prove it to themselves. For the first time, Zorvac felt a flicker of respect for these humans. Their methods might have been primitive, but their spirit was undeniable. As the sun rose higher, casting golden light over the weary recruits, Zorvac realized he still had much to learn about the species known as Deathworlders. The fourth day of observation began under a cloudless sky, the morning air crisp and cool. The recruits were gathered once again, but this time there were no physical obstacles in sight. Instead, they stood in neat rows facing a row of tables, set up with laptops, papers, and strange devices that beeped softly. Zorvac and Varnis exchanged puzzled glances. This was unfamiliar territory for them. Mental resilience wasn't something their own warriors trained for explicitly. Strength and skill were prized above all else among the Krylon Dominion. Colonel Alan Hayes walked to the front of the group, his presence commanding even without words. Today, he announced, you'll face challenges that aren't about muscles or speed. They're about your mind. How strong it is, how sharp, and how well you can keep going when things get tough. Lieutenant Emily Dawson handed out folders to each recruit. Inside were instructions for the day's activities. Hours of interrogation simulations, sleep deprivation tests, and psychological stress drills designed to push their limits. Zorvac leaned closer to Varnis. This seems unnecessary, he whispered. What purpose does it serve? Varnis shrugged. Perhaps we will see. The first task was an interrogation simulation. Recruits were taken one by one into a small, dimly lit room where Sergeant Miller awaited them. His voice was harsh, his questions relentless. Why did you join? He barked at Jake Carter, who sat stiffly in a metal chair. What makes you think you're good enough? You're just a mechanic, a nobody. Jake clenched his fists but forced himself to stay calm. He had practiced answers during earlier training sessions, but now, under the pressure of Miller's glare, those rehearsed responses felt hollow. Still, he dug deep, remembering why he was here. I joined because I wanted to be part of something bigger than myself, he said firmly. Because I believe in protecting people who can't protect themselves. Miller didn't let up. That's cute. But what happens when you fail? When someone dies because you weren't strong enough? Jake swallowed hard but held his ground. Then I'll learn from it and do better next time. When Jake emerged from the room, sweat dripping down his face, Maria Lopes went in next. She faced similar questions, her composure wavering slightly as Miller pressed her about her past as a nurse. You've seen death before, he growled. How are you supposed to handle it out here when you couldn't save everyone back then? Maria's hands trembled, but she steadied herself. I'm not here to fix everything, she replied quietly. I'm here to try. And if I fall, I'll get back up. That's what matters. Meanwhile, Daniel Quinn endured a different kind of test. Strapped into a chair with flashing lights and loud noises bombarding him, he struggled to focus on a screen displaying rapidly changing numbers. The goal was simple: add them up correctly despite the chaos around him. At first, Daniel faltered, his frustration mounting as errors piled up. But then he closed his eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and reopened them with renewed determination. Slowly, steadily, he began to block out the distractions, focusing only on the task at hand. Zorvac watched intently, his skepticism fading further with each passing moment. These humans weren't just enduring, they were adapting. Even Sarah Bennett, who looked ready to cry after being subjected to hours of simulated isolation, managed to compose herself when given a pen and paper to write down her thoughts. Writing became her lifeline, a way to process the fear and uncertainty swirling inside her. Kevin Walsh, however, reached his breaking point. During a mock prisoner of war scenario, he broke down completely, sobbing as imaginary captors shouted insults at him. For a moment, it seemed like he might quit altogether, but instead of shaming him, Colonel Hayes knelt beside him afterward, speaking gently. "It's okay to feel weak sometimes," he said. "What matters is whether you're willing to try again tomorrow." By the end of the day, the recruits were emotionally drained but strangely united. They shared knowing looks, understanding that everyone had moments of doubt, including themselves. Zorvac approached Hayes, his expression thoughtful. "You allow failure?" he asked, "even though it shows weakness." Hayes shook his head. "Failure isn't weakness. It's part of learning. If they don't fail now, they won't know how to handle it later when it really counts." Zorvac fell silent, mulling over the idea. In the Krylon Dominion, failure often meant exile, or worse. Yet here, these humans embraced it as a stepping stone to growth. As he glanced at the tired but determined faces of the recruits, he realized there was wisdom in their approach. Perhaps strength wasn't just about never falling. It was about always finding the courage to rise again. The fifth day dawned bright and clear, the sun casting sharp shadows across the training grounds. The recruits were already lining up, their faces showing a mix of fatigue and determination. Zorvac and Varnus stood nearby, their glowing eyes watching intently. Today's focus was weapons proficiency, a critical skill for any soldier. To the Krylon delegation, this seemed like an area where humanity might finally reveal its limitations. After all, the aliens' own technology far surpassed anything Earth had to offer. Colonel Alan Hayes walked to the front of the group, his boots crunching softly against the gravel. "Weapons are tools," he said firmly, "but they're only as effective as the person using them. Today, you'll learn how to handle firearms, and more importantly, how to control your mind while doing it." Lieutenant Emily Dawson handed out rifles to each recruit, explaining the basics of safety and operation. For many of the trainees, this was their first time holding a gun. Maria Lopes hesitated as she took hers, her hands trembling slightly. She had never imagined herself wielding a weapon, let alone firing one. But she steadied herself, gripping the rifle tightly and listening carefully to Dawson's instructions. The first exercise was marksmanship. The recruits moved to a firing range set up with paper targets at varying distances. Jake Carter stepped up to the line, his heart pounding. He raised the rifle, squinted through the sights, and pulled the trigger. The recoil surprised him, and his shot went wide, missing the target entirely. Frustration flickered across his face, but he didn't give up. Taking a deep breath, he adjusted his stance, focused on the target, and fired again. This time, the bullet struck close to the center. A small smile tugged at his lips. Maria approached the line next, her movements cautious but deliberate. Her first few shots were shaky, but then she found her rhythm. Her steady hands, honed from years of working in a hospital, proved surprisingly useful. By the end of her turn, she had hit the target consistently, earning a nod of approval from Sergeant Miller. Daniel Quinn, on the other hand, excelled almost immediately. His broad shoulders absorbed the rifle's kick effortlessly, and his aim was precise. Each shot landed near the bullseye, drawing murmurs of admiration from the other recruits. When someone asked how he did it, Daniel shrugged. "It's just focus," he said simply. "You block out everything else and concentrate on what's in front of you." Even quieter recruits like Sarah Bennett surprised themselves. At first, she struggled to hold the rifle steady, her arms shaking under its weight. But with encouragement from Jake and Maria, she persisted. By the time her turn ended, she had managed to hit the outer edge of the target multiple times. Though not perfect, it was progress. And that meant something. Zorvac watched silently, his skepticism slowly giving way to curiosity. These humans weren't natural-born warriors, yet they adapted quickly. Their techniques were rudimentary compared to Krylon standards, but there was a raw determination in their efforts that couldn't be ignored. Later in the day came close-quarters combat drills. Recruits paired off, practicing hand-to-hand techniques under the watchful eye of an instructor. Kevin Walsh faced Jake in one match, both men circling each other cautiously. Kevin threw a punch, which Jake easily dodged before countering with a swift strike to the chest. Kevin stumbled back but recovered, swinging again with newfound confidence. Though he lost the match, he earned respect for refusing to back down. As the sun began to set, Colonel Hayes gathered the recruits for a debrief. "Weapons are important," he said, "but they're not what make a soldier. What makes a soldier is the will to use them wisely, and the courage to stand by your teammates no matter what." Zorvac stepped forward after the session ended, his tone less dismissive than before. "Why do you teach them so much about teamwork?" he asked Hayes. "Wouldn't it be simpler to rely on individual strength?" Hayes shook his head. "Strength alone won't win battles. It's trust, coordination, and shared purpose that keep people alive. No one fights alone, not if they want to survive." Varnus glanced at Zorvac, who looked thoughtful. For the first time, the alien leader considered that perhaps humanity's greatest weapon wasn't its guns or gadgets, it was the bonds between its people. As the recruits packed up their gear, laughing and patting each other on the back, Zorvac realized he still had much to learn about these so-called Deathworlders. The sixth day brought a new challenge, one that would test the recruits' ability to work together under extreme conditions. The morning started with a briefing from Colonel Alan Hayes, who stood in front of the group with his usual calm authority. "Today," he announced, "you'll face a live-fire exercise. It's as close to real combat as we can get without putting you in actual danger." Lieutenant Emily Dawson handed out earplugs and safety goggles, explaining the rules clearly. The recruits were divided into squads and given mock weapons loaded with paint rounds. Their mission was simple: advance through a mock battlefield filled with obstacles, enemy patrols, and simulated explosions. The goal was to reach the far side of the course while avoiding casualties. If hit by a paint round, a recruit was considered out and had to leave the field. Zorvac and Varnus watched from an observation deck above the training area. To them, the setup looked crude compared to the advanced simulations used by the Krylon Dominion. Still, they couldn't deny the tension in the air. The recruits moved cautiously at first, their eyes scanning the smoke-filled landscape for signs of movement. Jake Carter's squad was among the first to move. Jake took point, his rifle raised as he led his team forward. Maria Lopes followed closely behind, her sharp eyes spotting a tripwire just in time to warn the others. They crouched low, crawling under barbed wire, while distant gunfire echoed around them. When smoke grenades erupted nearby, Jake signaled for everyone to stay close. "Stay alert," he whispered, his voice steady despite the chaos. "We don't know where they are." Suddenly, a burst of paint rounds flew past them, narrowly missing Sarah Bennett. She froze for a moment, startled, but Daniel Quinn pulled her back into cover. "You're okay," he said firmly. "Just keep moving." The squad regrouped behind a pile of sandbags, assessing their situation. Communication broke down briefly when Kevin Walsh suggested splitting up to flank the enemy, but Jake quickly shut down the idea. "We stick together," he reminded them. "That's how we survive." With renewed focus, the squad devised a plan. Using hand signals, Jake directed two teammates to create a diversion, while the rest flanked the opposing patrol. The ruse worked. The enemy turned their attention toward the distraction, allowing Jake's squad to slip past unnoticed. When one recruit was hit by a stray paint round, the others covered their retreat, ensuring no one else fell behind. In another part of the battlefield, Maria's quick thinking saved her squad from disaster. As they navigated a narrow trench, she noticed a hidden speaker emitting the sound of footsteps. Recognizing it as a trap, she warned her teammates to stop. Moments later, a hail of paint rounds zipped over their heads, striking the dirt wall instead of flesh. Zorvac leaned forward on the railing, his expression unreadable. He had expected chaos and confusion, but what he saw was something else entirely. These humans weren't just reacting. They were strategizing, communicating, and adapting in real time. Even when things went wrong, they found ways to recover. By the end of the exercise, most squads had reached the finish line, though not without losses. Some recruits sat on the ground, exhausted and covered in colorful splatters of paint, while others cheered their teammates who had made it through unscathed. Colonel Hayes approached the group, his tone proud but firm. "You did well," he said. "But remember, teamwork is what kept you alive out there. Trust your squad, and they'll trust you back." Zorvac approached Hayes after the debrief, his curiosity evident. "How do you teach them to act so cohesively?" he asked. "It seems unnatural." Hayes smiled faintly. "It's not unnatural, it's human. People are stronger together than they are alone. That's something even your kind might learn from us." Varnus glanced at Zorvac, who remained silent. For the first time, the alien leader seemed unsure of himself. As he looked down at the recruits laughing and helping each other up, he realized that humanity's greatest strength wasn't its technology or physical prowess. It was its ability to unite in the face of adversity. And for all their supposed frailty, these humans were proving to be far more formidable than Zorvac had ever imagined. The seventh day of training arrived, bringing with it a sense of anticipation. The recruits were tired but determined, their bodies worn from days of relentless challenges. Today's focus was on facing failure, a lesson that would test not only their skills, but also their resolve. Zorvac and Varnus stood nearby, observing silently as Colonel Alan Hayes gathered the group. "Not everyone will succeed," Hayes began, his voice steady and clear. "Some of you won't make it to the end. That's okay. What matters is how you handle it. Failure isn't the end. It's just another step." Lieutenant Emily Dawson handed out assignments for the day. Each recruit would attempt a series of increasingly difficult tasks designed to push them beyond their limits. Those who couldn't complete a task would be pulled aside and given the option to quit or try again later. It was a brutal system, but one meant to prepare them for the realities of life as soldiers. Jake Carter stepped up first, his turn coming during a climbing exercise. The obstacle was a tall rope ladder suspended over a muddy pit. Jake grabbed the ropes and started upward, his muscles straining with each pull. Halfway up, his grip slipped, and he fell backward into the mud below. He lay there for a moment, winded and frustrated, before climbing back to his feet. Without hesitation, he tried again, and this time, he made it to the top. Maria Lopes faced her own challenge during a timed navigation test. Armed with only a map and compass, she had to find specific markers scattered across rough terrain. At first, she moved confidently, her steps quick and precise. But when she realized she'd misread the map and gone off course, panic set in. For a moment, she considered giving up, but then she remembered Hayes' words. Taking a deep breath, she recalculated her position and pressed on, eventually finding all the markers just before time ran out. Daniel Quinn's moment came during a simulated hostage rescue scenario. His squad was ambushed by enemy forces, and chaos erupted. Daniel reacted instinctively, charging forward to protect his teammates. But in the heat of the moment, he made a critical mistake. He left his flank exposed, allowing an opponent to shoot him with a paint round. As he stepped off the field, disqualified from the exercise, shame burned in his chest. Yet when the drill ended, Jake approached him. "You did what you thought was right," Jake said firmly. "That counts for something. And next time, we'll do better, together." Sarah Bennett struggled during a leadership exercise, tasked with guiding her team through a complex puzzle under strict time constraints. Her quiet nature made it hard for her to assert herself, and her squad grew frustrated as the clock ticked down. When they failed to solve the puzzle in time, tears welled up in her eyes. But instead of walking away, she asked for feedback, vowing to improve. Kevin Walsh reached his breaking point during a grueling endurance run. The route was long and punishing, with steep hills and rocky paths. Kevin pushed himself harder than ever before, but halfway through, his legs gave out. He collapsed to his knees, gasping for air, convinced he couldn't go on. Just as he was about to raise his hand to signal surrender, Maria appeared beside him. "You can do this," she urged softly. "One step at a time. I'll stay with you." With Maria's encouragement, Kevin forced himself back to his feet. Though he finished last, he crossed the line with his head held high, earning applause from his fellow recruits. Zorvac watched it all unfold, his expression thoughtful. These humans weren't perfect. They stumbled, faltered, and sometimes failed outright. But even in their weakest moments, they found ways to persevere. They supported each other, learned from their mistakes, and refused to give up. Varnus turned to Zorvac. "They are resilient," he admitted quietly. "More so than I expected." Zorvac nodded slowly. "Yes," he replied. "Their strength lies not in avoiding failure, but in embracing it. Perhaps that is why they are called Deathworlders." By the end of the day, the recruits gathered around Colonel Hayes, their faces marked by exhaustion, but also pride. Hayes looked at them, his tone firm yet kind. "Remember this feeling," he said. "Failure doesn't define you. What defines you is how you rise after falling." As Zorvac and Varnus walked away, the alien leader felt a newfound respect for these humans. Their methods might have been simple, but their spirit was unshakable. And though he still didn't fully understand them, one thing was clear. Humanity's greatest weapon wasn't its guns or gadgets. It was its refusal to stay down. The 8th day brought a quiet shift in the atmosphere at Fort Ironclad. The recruits had endured countless challenges, but now it was time for graduation, a moment of pride and reflection. For some, however, it would also be a time of reckoning. Not everyone who started the program would finish it. Zorvac and Varnus stood near Colonel Alan Hayes, their glowing eyes fixed on the recruits as they lined up in neat rows. The air was cool, with a gentle breeze rustling the flags hanging nearby. Colonel Hayes stepped forward, his voice carrying over the field. "Today marks the end of your basic training," he began. "You've pushed yourselves farther than many thought possible. But remember, this isn't just about surviving. It's about becoming better than you were yesterday." Lieutenant Emily Dawson handed out certificates to those who had completed the program. Each name called out was met with cheers from the group, their camaraderie shining brightly despite weeks of hardship. Jake Carter accepted his certificate with a grin, his hands calloused from days of climbing ropes and holding rifles. Maria Lopes stood tall, her face glowing with quiet pride. Daniel Quinn's broad shoulders relaxed slightly as he shook Hayes' hand, a rare smile breaking through his usual serious expression. But not all stories ended happily. Kevin Walsh stepped forward when his name was called, not to receive a certificate, but to say goodbye. He had struggled throughout the program, giving his best effort, but ultimately falling short during a critical evaluation. His decision to leave wasn't made lightly, but he knew it was the right one. As he faced the group, his voice trembled. "I didn't make it," Kevin admitted, "but I don't regret trying. You all showed me what it means to keep going, even when things are hard. Thank you for that." The recruits erupted into applause, their respect for Kevin evident. No one mocked him or dismissed his efforts. Instead, they celebrated the courage it took to try in the first place. Jake clapped loudly, shouting words of encouragement, while Maria offered a warm hug. Even Daniel nodded approvingly, acknowledging the strength it took to walk away with dignity. Zorvac watched the scene unfold, his sharp gaze lingering on Kevin. In Krylon culture, failure was a source of shame, often punished harshly. Yet here, these humans treated it differently. They honored the attempt, recognizing that growth came from both success and struggle. Varnus leaned closer to Zorvac, his tone thoughtful. "This is unusual," Varnus murmured. "They do not punish weakness. Instead, they celebrate it." Zorvac didn't respond immediately. He turned to Colonel Hayes, who stood nearby watching the exchange. "Why do you allow someone like him to leave without penalty?" Zorvac asked, gesturing toward Kevin. "Wouldn't it be better to force him to stay?" Hayes shook his head firmly. Forcing someone to stay against their will doesn't make them stronger. It breaks them. We teach our people to know their limits, to recognize when they've given all they can. And if they choose to leave, we honor that choice because it shows self-awareness and honesty. Zorvak fell silent, mulling over the idea. To him, the concept of rewarding failure seemed illogical, even foolish. Yet, as he looked at the recruits cheering for Kevin, he saw something powerful, a bond forged not by perfection but by shared vulnerability. These humans weren't defined solely by their victories. They were shaped by their struggles too. Later, as the ceremony drew to a close, Hayes addressed the group one final time. Graduation isn't the end. It's the beginning. What you've learned here will carry you forward, whether you continue as soldiers or find another path. Remember, strength isn't about never falling. It's about rising every time you do. The recruits saluted in unison, their faces filled with determination. Kevin lingered for a moment longer, shaking hands and exchanging hugs before walking toward the gates. Though he wouldn't continue with the program, he carried something far more valuable: the knowledge that he had tried his best and earned respect for it. As Zorvak and Varnus prepared to depart, the alien leader glanced back at the humans one last time. Their methods might have been simple, but their philosophy was profound. Humanity's resilience wasn't rooted in avoiding failure. It was built on embracing it, learning from it, and moving forward together. And for the first time, Zorvak felt a flicker of admiration for these so-called Deathworlders. The morning sun rose over Fort Ironclad, casting golden light across the training grounds where the recruits stood in formation for the final time. Their uniforms were worn and patched, their faces marked by exhaustion, but also pride. Colonel Alan Hayes moved among them, his expression stern yet approving. Lieutenant Emily Dawson stayed close, her clipboard tucked under one arm as she prepared for the day's closing events. Zorvak and Varnus lingered nearby, their presence now less imposing, more curious. Over the past week, they had witnessed things that challenged everything they thought they knew about humanity. They watched silently as the recruits lined up to receive their certificates, each name called out echoing like a testament to their hard work. Jake Carter stepped forward first, his wiry frame straighter than it had been on the first day. His handshake with Colonel Hayes was firm, his smile wide. Maria Lopes followed, her dark hair tied neatly back, her eyes shining with quiet determination. Daniel Quinn, who rarely showed emotion, allowed himself a small grin as he accepted his certificate. Even Sarah Bennett, once hesitant and unsure, now held her head high, her confidence evident. After the ceremony, Zorvak approached Jake, his glowing eyes narrowing slightly. "You," he said, pointing at Jake. "You are ordinary, weak, even. How do you endure so much?" Jake blinked, caught off guard by the question. For a moment, he hesitated, then shrugged. "I don't know," he admitted honestly. "Maybe it's because I've got something worth fighting for. My family, my friends, people who need protecting. We're not special, but we do what needs to be done." Zorvak tilted his head, studying Jake closely. "And if you fail? If those people die anyway?" Jake's expression hardened slightly, but he didn't look away. "Then I try again, or someone else picks up where I left off. That's how it works. You don't stop just because it's hard." Varnus muttered something under his breath, his tone thoughtful. Zorvak ignored him, turning instead to Maria, who stood nearby chatting with Sarah. "What about you?" he asked her bluntly. "Why fight when you could stay safe?" Maria met his gaze without flinching. "Because staying safe doesn't mean anything if others aren't safe too," she replied simply. "I've seen pain. I've felt it. If I can help stop someone else from feeling that way, then it's worth it." Zorvak frowned, taken aback by the simplicity of her answer. These humans weren't motivated by glory or power. They fought for reasons that seemed almost mundane. Yet there was a depth to their words, a quiet strength that resonated deeply. As the morning wore on, Zorvak addressed the entire group, his voice carrying an unfamiliar note of respect. "I came here expecting weakness," he admitted. "Instead, I found something far greater. A species capable of enduring unimaginable hardship for no other reason than to protect what matters." The recruits exchanged surprised glances, unsure how to respond. Colonel Hayes stepped forward, nodding slightly. "That's who we are," he said simply. "We're not perfect, but we don't give up." Later, as Zorvak and Varnus prepared to leave, the alien leader paused to look back at the humans one last time. He saw Jake helping Kevin pack his belongings, offering words of encouragement, despite Kevin's decision to leave. He saw Maria and Sarah laughing together, their friendship forged through shared struggle. And he saw Daniel standing quietly apart, his focus unwavering as always. For all their flaws, these humans possessed something extraordinary, a spirit that refused to break, no matter the odds. As the Krylon ship lifted into the sky, Zorvak couldn't shake the feeling that his own kind still had much to learn about true strength. Back at Fort Ironclad, Colonel Hayes watched the ship disappear into the clouds. Turning to the recruits, he smiled faintly. "They'll remember us," he said. "And maybe next time, they'll think twice before underestimating Earth." The recruits cheered, their voices ringing out across the field. They had proven themselves, not just to the aliens, but to themselves. And though their journey was far from over, they knew they were ready for whatever came next. The Krylon ship hovered silently above the clearing at Fort Ironclad, its sleek surface gleaming in the sunlight. Zorvak stood at the edge of the landing site, his glowing eyes scanning the humans one last time before departure. The recruits were busy packing up their gear, laughing and talking as if they hadn't just endured weeks of relentless challenges. Colonel Alan Hayes and Lieutenant Emily Dawson stood nearby, watching the aliens with calm expressions. Zorvak turned to face the group, his posture rigid but his tone unexpectedly thoughtful. "When I arrived here," he began, his voice carrying clearly across the field, "I expected to see weakness, fragile creatures clinging to survival. Instead, I witnessed something far greater, a species capable of enduring unimaginable hardship for no other reason than to protect what matters." The recruits stopped what they were doing, surprised by the alien leader's words. Jake Carter exchanged a glance with Maria Lopez, who shrugged slightly, unsure how to respond. Daniel Quinn crossed his arms, his expression unreadable, while Sarah Bennett adjusted her glasses nervously. "You are not strong in the ways we measure strength," Zorvak continued. "Your bodies are fragile, your tools primitive. Yet you possess something my kind does not fully understand. A resilience born not from power, but from purpose. You fight not for glory or conquest, but for each other." Colonel Hayes stepped forward, his hands clasped behind his back. "That's what makes us human," he said simply. "We're not perfect, but we don't give up. Not when it counts." Zorvak nodded slowly, as if considering the weight of Hayes' words. For the first time, there was no arrogance in his gaze, only curiosity and perhaps a hint of admiration. Turning to Varnus, he gave a subtle signal, and the two aliens began walking toward their ship. As they ascended the ramp, Zorvak paused and looked back over his shoulder. "Remember this day," he said quietly, though his voice carried enough for everyone to hear. "Because if your species ever chooses to unite fully, you will become a force unlike any other. Even the Krylon Dominion would tremble at your resolve." With that, the ramp closed behind him, and the ship lifted gracefully into the sky. The hum of its engines faded into silence, leaving the humans standing in quiet awe. No one spoke for a moment, the gravity of Zorvak's words sinking in. Colonel Hayes broke the silence with a chuckle. "Well," he said, his tone light but proud, "looks like we made an impression." The recruits erupted into laughter and cheers, their voices echoing across the base. Jake clapped Daniel on the back, grinning widely. "Guess we showed them what Deathworlders are made of, huh?" Maria smiled softly, shaking her head. "They didn't expect much from us. But maybe that's a good thing. Now they'll think twice before underestimating Earth again." Sarah adjusted her glasses, her cheeks flushed with pride. "Do you think they'll tell others about us?" she asked hesitantly. Hayes nodded firmly. "Oh, they'll tell them. And next time, whoever comes won't be so quick to judge." As the group dispersed, Jake lingered for a moment, staring at the empty sky where the Krylon ship had vanished. He felt a strange mix of pride and determination. These past weeks had changed him, not just physically, but mentally. He wasn't the same mechanic who had shown up at Fort Ironclad, unsure of himself and his place in the world. Now he knew exactly why he was here. And he wasn't afraid to keep going, no matter what lay ahead. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the recruits gathered around a small fire. They shared stories, laughed about their struggles, and talked about the future. Kevin Walsh, though no longer part of the program, joined them briefly, offering heartfelt thanks before heading home. Even Sarah, once the quietest among them, found herself joining in the conversation, her confidence growing with every word. Colonel Hayes watched from a distance, his expression thoughtful. Humanity wasn't perfect, it never would be. But its greatest strength lay in its ability to adapt, persevere, and stand together in the face of adversity. The Krylons had come seeking answers, but they left with questions and a newfound respect for the species known as Deathworlders. As the fire crackled softly in the cool night air, Jake leaned back, staring at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Krylon delegation was returning to their dominion, carrying tales of humanity's unyielding spirit. And somewhere deep inside, Jake knew this was only the beginning, for Earth and for all who called it home.